At 23, my entire world shifted on its axis. Life has a way of starting out like a beautiful dream, only to twist into a nightmare when you least expect it.
I want to pause for a moment. If you feel the love and are still listening to my story, please subscribe and hit the like button on the Grandparents Memories channel to show your support. Thank you so much.
What should have been my moment of perfect joy, my wedding day, instead marked the beginning of an unsolved mystery that would cast its shadow over my life for years to come. I fell deeply for a man who vanished without warning on the very day we were to be joined forever, and it wasn't until I had abandoned all hope that the truth finally emerged. But was fate truly offering me a second chance at this love? I'm Eleanor Wilson, and my tale begins in Virginia in 1975. I've never been anything but ordinary, a woman with simple roots in Virginia's countryside, where time seemed to move more slowly and tradition held powerful sway. During that era, young women like myself were expected to marry, and I had always been captivated by the idea of finding true, passionate love. Never could I have imagined that the love I discovered would condemn me to decades of waiting, heartache, and an enigma that would take nearly a lifetime to unravel. My upbringing was steeped in traditional values, with strict adherence to religious principles. Robert Wilson, my father, rarely displayed warmth, though he labored tirelessly at his hardware store to provide for our family. My mother, Martha Wilson, showed more tenderness, yet firmly believed a woman's purpose centered around homemaking and child-rearing. Throughout my youth, I constantly heard that respectable young ladies should secure marriages to industrious men and establish families promptly. While I never openly challenged these expectations, something inside me yearned for more. I didn't want marriage out of mere social obligation. I craved a connection of genuine, profound love. Réessayez, Claude peut faire des erreurs. Assurez-vous de vérifier ses réponses. On the morning of the wedding, everything seemed perfect. The church was packed, guests were already arriving, and I was getting ready in my room with my cousins, nervous and laughing. My mother was adjusting my veil when suddenly someone knocked at the door. It was David, Michael's brother, breathless. He left early to solve a problem and hasn't returned yet. My heart froze. Solve what? I asked, feeling an inexplicable anguish. I don't know. He said it was something important, but that he would return in time. I tried to calm myself. Michael was a responsible man. If he left, he would return. But as the hours passed and the church filled up, my anxiety grew. The priest looked at me with concern. My father was beginning to lose patience. My mother held my hand, trying to calm me. He must be on his way, sweetheart. Stay calm. But he didn't come. And as time passed, shame and desperation took over. Had he changed his mind? Had I been abandoned at the altar? I couldn't believe it. Michael wouldn't do that to me. But then, why wasn't he appearing? The anguish grew. The church began to empty. My eyes were red from crying so much. The feeling of being the woman abandoned on her wedding day was crushing me. It was the worst day of my life, and that's how my nightmare began. The sun had barely risen when my mother entered my room, calling me with a voice full of emotion. It's time, sweetheart. Today is your day. I opened my eyes and for a moment didn't recognize where I was. The last few months had been so intense that my body seemed tired, but the expectation in my chest was greater than any exhaustion. I took a deep breath. It was my wedding day. I got out of bed and looked at my dress hanging up, the morning light coming through the window and illuminating the white fabric with French lace. I felt a shiver. It was real. In a few hours, I would be Michael Anderson's wife. In the bathroom, I splashed water on my face, trying to contain the whirlwind of emotions that dominated me. Happiness, nervousness, and a touch of fear, but a good fear, that flutter in your stomach that comes when you're about to experience something momentous. The women of the family began to arrive to help me. My cousins arranged my hair, my mother checked every detail of the dress, and my aunt kept repeating that this would be the most beautiful wedding the town had ever seen. "Michael is a lucky man. You look beautiful, Elle," said my mother, adjusting my veil. I smiled. Yes, I was happy. Yes, I was a lucky woman to have found a man like him. Outside, the church bells were ringing. The town's murmur was growing. My father, dressed in his best suit, paced back and forth in the living room, making sure everything was in order. A daughter's wedding was a matter of honor for a man like him, and nothing could go wrong. Little did we know that everything was about to go wrong. Time was passing, and he wasn't arriving. The ceremony was scheduled for 10 a.m. At 9:30, a young man came running to my house. "The groom hasn't arrived at the church yet." My mother looked at me, surprised. "He must be delayed with something. Nothing to worry about, sweetheart." But time kept passing. 10 minutes, 20, half an hour. At 10:15, Michael's brother David arrived in a hurry, sweaty, eyes wide. He left early to solve a problem, but hasn't returned. The phrase echoed in my mind. "What problem?" I asked, feeling the blood drain from my face. "I don't know. He didn't say. He just mentioned it was something important and that he would return in time." By this point, my father was already impatient. A responsible man doesn't disappear on his wedding day. But I knew Michael. He wouldn't disappear. He wouldn't leave me waiting at the altar. So where was he? The clock marked 10:45, and the church was packed. Guests were murmuring among themselves. Some looked at me with pity. Others seemed eager for some scandal. I remained seated in the living room of my family's house in my wedding dress, hands on my lap. My mother squeezed my hand. "Calm down, my daughter. He will appear." But would he? My mind began to race. What could have happened? An accident? A kidnapping? A panic attack? Or had he simply fled? The thought hit me like a blade to the chest. What if Michael had changed his mind? What if he never loved me the way I loved him? Time seemed frozen, but reality pushed me mercilessly. The priest was already getting impatient. My father was pacing back and forth with a closed expression, and some aunts began to suggest that perhaps it would be better to cancel the ceremony. But I didn't want to cancel. I wanted Michael. Where was he? At 11:30, the atmosphere was no longer one of expectation, but of shame. Some people left, others whispered, and I wanted to bury my head under the veil and disappear. "Maybe he ran away," someone said, a phrase that cut me like a blade. Tears began to fall from my eyes. My mother hugged me, but it didn't help. I felt humiliated, abandoned, betrayed. By this time, the men of the family had begun to search the town for him. They went to his house, to the train station, to the bars. Nothing. No clue. No news. He had simply disappeared. The altar remained empty. The priest closed the Bible. The flowers began to wilt in the midday heat. My father took off his jacket and threw it on the chair, defeated. I continued to sit there, alone on my wedding day. And that was the last time I wore that white dress. After hours of waiting, the guests left one by one. Some women held my hand, saying words of comfort that only increased my pain. "You're a beautiful young woman, Elle. God has a purpose for everything." Maybe it's better this way, my dear. Maybe he wasn't the right man. We never really know a man until the wedding day. I wanted to scream. I knew Michael. He wasn't a cowardly man. He wasn't the type to leave a woman waiting at the altar. Something had happened, I knew it had, but no one else seemed to believe it. People left, the church emptied, the priest closed the ceremony book and sighed as if he had seen this story before. My father, with his face red with anger, locked himself in his room without saying a word. My mother tried to convince me to take off the dress, but I sat there on the sofa in my wedding dress, unable to process what was happening. What if he never came back? What if he was dead? Or worse, what if he had simply gone away of his own free will? By the end of the day, my father finally acted. He called Michael's brothers and some men from the town to look for him. They asked the obvious questions. Had he mentioned anything in the past few days? Any fight? Any doubt? Did he have money saved? Anything that suggested he was planning to flee? No one could answer. Michael was excited about the wedding. He made plans, talked about the future. There was nothing to suggest he wanted to disappear. The men went to his house. His clothes were still there. The money was still in the safe. His passport was still in the drawer, but Michael was nowhere to be found. My desperation began to grow. Deep down, a part of me still hoped he would suddenly return with some explanation, saying it was all a mistake, a misunderstanding, a stroke of bad luck. But night fell, and he didn't return. The next morning, my mother woke me up. I was still in my wedding dress, the same dress, wrinkled, stained with tears, a cruel reminder of what should have been a happy day. "Sweetheart, let's go to the police station." That phrase gave me a chill. If we were going to the police station, it meant it was no longer a delay. It meant my fiancé was officially missing. The sheriff heard our story with a tired look. "Are you sure he didn't run away?" My blood boiled. Michael would never do that, but he didn't seem convinced. "Many women have said that before, young lady. We'll investigate, but sometimes when a man decides to leave, there's not much we can do." I left there with a lump in my throat, and that's when I began to realize that for the entire town, I was the abandoned bride. What hurt more, the shame or the uncertainty? In those days, there was no internet, but news traveled as fast as the wind. Within days, my story was on everyone's lips. They say he had another woman in the next town and ran away with her. I heard he had gambling debts and had to disappear. Maybe it was divine punishment. No man disappears like that without a reason. I couldn't bear to go out on the street. I felt the heavy looks, the whispers, people commenting as if they knew more about my life than I did myself. But nothing hurt as much as a thought that began to torment me. What if I never saw him again? What if he was dead? Each passing day, the pain became more unbearable. The searches continued for weeks, but without any clue. No body was found. No witness appeared saying they saw him leave. It was as if he had been swallowed by the earth. My father began to lose patience. "It's time to move on, Elle." He was a coward. But I couldn't. I couldn't accept that a man disappears on his own wedding day without leaving a trace. Time passed, 5, 10, 20 years, and then a letter arrived, a letter that would change everything. After Michael disappeared, my life was never the same. In the first few months, I still woke up every day hoping he would return. Each knock at the door made my heart race. Each letter that arrived made me hold my breath, thinking it would finally be from him. But time passed, and his silence grew louder than any word could be. The town moved on, if not me. People began to act as if my story was just another forgotten case, something that had already passed. The neighbors no longer whispered so much when I passed by, no longer looked at me with pity, but I knew that deep down, Everyone thought the same thing. Poor thing, abandoned at the altar. My mother tried to cheer me up. My daughter, life hasn't ended. You can still find a good man. But how could I look at another man when the only person I loved had disappeared without a trace? For a long time, I waited. Each new day I wondered, where is he? Does he think of me? Is he still alive? And most painfully of all, if he were alive, why had he never returned? As the years passed, my family tried to push me in other directions. My father, practical and rigid, as always, no longer had patience for my sadness. Enough. That man was a coward. Wake up to life. But I didn't believe it. I refused the idea that Michael had simply run away. Something had happened to him. Only the world didn't wait for answers like I did. It simply moved on. My friends began to get married, have children. Some were even becoming grandmothers. And I was still waiting. Until one day, something inside me broke. It was at a Sunday lunch at my sister's house. The children were running around the yard. My mother was chatting animatedly with the in-laws, and everyone seemed happy. That's when I heard one of the aunts saying, Elle lost her youth waiting for a dead man. The shock ran through my body like a knife. Was that what everyone thought? That I had clung to a ghost? For the first time, I allowed myself to think about the possibility that he might never return, and the idea destroyed me inside. In the years that followed, I stopped actively waiting, but that didn't mean I had forgotten. I simply began to live on autopilot, becoming that woman everyone saw as a good daughter, a good aunt, a good neighbor. But I was empty, never aging. My parents tried to introduce me to other men, but I didn't want anyone who wasn't Michael. At 40, I began to accept that I might never know what happened. At 50, I no longer talked about it, and then time turned into decades, until one day a letter arrived, a letter that made all that silence crumble. After Michael's disappearance, my life became an eternal after. After the searches, after the tears, after the shame. But what came after? What remained for someone like me who lived to love a man who simply disappeared? At 30, they no longer looked at me as the abandoned bride. Now I was just a single woman, marked by the past. People stopped asking about him. Even my mother, who once tried to console me, no longer mentioned his name. And that hurt because, to me, he still existed. I never stopped imagining him somewhere, perhaps without memory, perhaps trapped in a life he didn't choose. I felt that he hadn't forgotten me, but what to do with that feeling? I tried to move on. I swear I tried. My family never accepted my solitude. Elle, you're still young. Meet someone, get married, have children. My mother even organized meetings with respectable men, but no one was Michael. Each look, each conversation, each marriage proposal made me feel as if I were betraying a silent promise.
I want to pause for a moment. If you feel the love and are still listening to my story, please subscribe and hit the like button on the Grandparents Memories channel to show your support. Thank you so much.
And then, with time, I stopped trying. I resigned myself to living for others. I lived to care for my mother when she got sick, lived to help my nieces choose their wedding dresses, lived to celebrate the birthdays of the family's children. But I didn't live for myself because I knew that something inside me was stuck in the past. Time passed. My sisters got married, had children, grandchildren. I remained there, in the same house, in the same room where I had prepared for the wedding that never happened. The walls seemed to whisper the story that everyone tried to forget. There was a chest at the bottom of my wardrobe. Inside it, the wedding dress. I never had the courage to throw it away, never had the courage to look at it. Sometimes I caught myself thinking, what if I had married another man? What if I had moved on? But then a greater force pulled me back. I couldn't give up without knowing the truth. The town was no longer the same. The streets changed, the people changed, the customs changed, but inside me, time was frozen. The silence about Michael became unbearable until the silence was broken. A letter arrived, a letter that brought a name I hadn't heard in over 20 years, a name that made my heart almost stop. The envelope was simple, without a return address, and was left at my door as if it were just another ordinary paper. But as soon as I saw my name written in careful handwriting, I felt a shiver run through my body. My fingers trembled as I tore the paper, and what I found inside made my heart stop for a moment. L, you may not recognize me, but there's something you need to know. The letter was short, direct, and carried a name I hadn't seen in over 20 years, a name I never forgot. Michael. I felt my body weaken, as if suddenly all the strength that kept me standing had disappeared. I read those words again and again, trying to understand if it was real or just a cruel joke of fate. The paper seemed to vibrate between my fingers as if it were burning, bringing back memories I had tried to bury. My mind entered a whirlwind. How could someone write that name after so many years? How did someone dare to mess with my story, with a pain that never healed? My first instinct was to believe it was a mistake, a confusion, any coincidence. But then my eyes found the stamp in the corner of the envelope. It was from a psychiatric hospital, Riverside Psychiatric Hospital. My chest tightened. I felt a lump in my throat and needed to sit down before my legs gave way. A psychiatric hospital? What did that mean? The questions began to hammer my head, each one more desperate than the last. Was he institutionalized all this time? Lost, alive but without memory? The answers seemed so close, and yet unreachable. My eyes burned, a mixture of anger, fear, and hope mixing inside me. For years, I tried to move on. For years, I fought against the memory of him. And now fate was pulling me back to the past, forcing me to face something I no longer knew if I was strong enough to bear. The decision to go to the hospital wasn't easy. I spent the night awake, holding that letter against my chest, feeling the weight of everything it represented. If I walked through those doors, if I saw with my own eyes that Michael was alive, that somehow he existed all this time, what would that do to me? What if he was there but didn't remember me? What if I was just a ghost from the past, a woman he would never recognize? But I knew I couldn't live the rest of my life without knowing the truth. I needed to see him, needed to hear his voice, look into his eyes, and understand what really happened on what should have been the happiest day of my life. The next morning, I took courage. I dressed simply but dignified, took the letter, held it firmly, and left home with a heart that beat so strongly it seemed to want to escape from my chest. The hospital was in another town, an old building with high walls and small windows. The smell of disinfectant mixed with old memories hung in the air, and I felt a chill as I crossed the reception. My name was already registered. They were expecting me. A nurse guided me through white, silent corridors, each step echoing like a dull beat inside my chest. My heart hammered against my ribs while my mind tried to prepare for what was about to happen. Then she stopped in front of a door. "He's in here," said the woman, with a look that seemed to carry the weight of what I was about to see. For a moment, my hands went cold with sweat. The reality of the situation fell on me like an avalanche. What did I expect? That he would be there waiting for me, smiling, calling me by name? Time doesn't forgive. Time changes people, steals stories, erases faces. I took a deep breath and entered. The man was sitting near the window, looking outside. His hair was shorter, mixed with gray strands, and his body seemed thinner, fragile. For a second, my mind refused to accept it. My heart wanted to deny it. But then he turned his face, and I knew it was Michael. Time had transformed him, but those eyes were the same. A shock ran down my spine, and I had to hold on to the side of the door not to fall. My lips trembled. My breath was caught in my throat. He was there, alive, in front of me. But he didn't recognize me. The silence was the cruelest thing I had ever experienced. He looked at me as if I were just another stranger. No emotion, no glimmer of recognition in his eyes, just a lost, empty look. My mouth tried to form words, but nothing came out. How to say, "It's me, Elle, the woman who waited for you all her life." How to ask, "Where have you been all this time?" When I knew the answer could destroy me, he frowned, tilted his head to the side as if trying to find something deep in his memory, but the emptiness remained. "Hello," was all he said, and at that moment, my heart broke in a way I never thought possible. Time seemed to have stopped. I was there before the man I loved more than anything in life, the man for whom I cried endless nights, for whom I waited for decades, but he didn't know who I was. There was no recognition in his eyes, no surprise, no emotion, just an empty, lost look, as if I were just another random person crossing his path. My throat closed, and a bitter taste filled my mouth. What should I do? I wanted to run to him, hold his hands, beg him to remember me, but a part of me felt afraid, a terrible fear that any attempt would be in vain. He looked back at the window again, as if my presence had no meaning at all. My heart was breaking more with each second. I didn't know what I expected to find when I arrived there, but I never imagined it would hurt so much to realize that to him, I was just a stranger. I took a deep breath, swallowing the lump in my throat, and took a step forward. "Michael?" My voice came out weak, trembling, as if I had to relearn how to pronounce his name after so many years. He frowned and looked at me again, now with a little more attention, but there was no memory there, no glimmer of recognition. "Do I know you?" His voice was calm, without emotion. It was like being stabbed in the chest. I wanted to cry, wanted to scream that yes, he knew me. He knew me better than anyone in the world. He knew my laugh, my fears, my dreams. He knew how to hold my hand in a way that made me feel safe, knew exactly how to make me smile after a bad day. He was the person who promised to be by my side, who said he would love me forever. How could he have forgotten? But what could I do? He didn't remember, and I was there, completely powerless before the emptiness that now occupied the place where love once existed. The nurse approached, sensing my desperation, and gently touched my shoulder. "He arrived here many years ago," she explained in a gentle but firm tone. "We don't know exactly what happened, but he was found without documents, without memory. They just said he was wandering the streets, disoriented, confused. When they brought him in, he didn't know his name, his origin, and to this day, he doesn't remember." My eyes burned, and her words hit me like punches. "He never tried to leave here, never looked for his family?" My voice came out more desperate than I wanted. The nurse shook her head. "For him, there is no family, there is no past. He lives only in the present." My body began to tremble. This couldn't be real. How can someone simply lose their entire life? How can fate be so cruel, taking from him not only his memory, but all the love he had inside him? His silence was the most unbearable thing. He just watched me without knowing why this strange woman was crying for him. "You don't remember me?" I whispered, more to myself than to him. He blinked slowly, as if trying to find some answer within himself. "I'm sorry," was all he said. And it was then that I realized that perhaps I had waited my entire life for someone who would never return. The pain of this realization hit me with an absurd force. I spent decades living with a ghost, waiting for a man who was now right in front of me, but who was no longer the same. The Michael I knew had disappeared long before that letter arrived. My knees almost gave way. Everything seemed to spin around me. I wanted to leave, to run away, to erase that moment from my mind. But at the same time, something held me to the ground because despite everything, I still loved that man. I took a deep breath, trying to find strength where there was none left. Can you call me by my name?" I asked, feeling a foolish thread of hope inside me. He looked at my face. "What is your name?" That question was the final blow. I swallowed my tears, holding myself together so as not to crumble right there. "Eleanor," I replied, my voice almost disappearing. He repeated my name softly, testing the sound of it on his lips, but there was no sign of memory, no hidden memory emerging from the depths of his eyes. I knew that would be the greatest pain of my life, and I also knew that from then on, I would need to make the most difficult decision of all, insist on trying to bring him back, even though he might never recognize me, or finally accept that the Michael I loved no longer existed. My body was there, but my soul seemed to have been trapped in the past. I felt my heart beating strongly, almost coming out of my chest, as I tried to process everything that had just happened. Michael, the man I waited for more than 20 years, was in front of me, breathing, alive. But it was as if he had never existed, as if that love that once united us was just a story I made up. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hold his face in my hands, look deep into his eyes, and shake him until he remembered everything. But what I had before me was a man with an empty gaze, lost in a time I didn't know. The Michael I loved had been left behind along with my wedding dress stored at the bottom of the wardrobe, along with the promises of a life that never happened. The nurse watched in silence. I think she had seen scenes like this before. People who spent years waiting for an answer, and when they finally found it, they realized the answer was much worse than the doubt. She gently touched my shoulder, a gesture of empathy that somehow brought me back to reality. "Do you want to talk to him a little more?" she asked, her voice low, careful. I wanted to, and at the same time didn't want to. I wanted to sit beside him, tell every detail of our story, show photos, tell him who he was, who we were. But I also wanted to flee from there, run away, and never look back. I was facing a cruel dilemma: fight for a love that might never exist again, or accept that fate had robbed me of everything, even the chance of a goodbye. Michael continued to look at me, but without any real emotion, just a curious look, as if I were a piece of a puzzle he could never fit. This killed me inside. During all those years, I tortured myself thinking about where he was, if he was alive, if he thought of me, and now, seeing him there, so close and yet so distant, I realized that the pain of losing him was less than the pain of finding him without him knowing who I was. I swallowed my tears. There was no point in despairing. "Do you like living here?" I asked, trying to make some conversation, some connection, anything. He shrugged. "It's quiet." Those two words made me realize the size of the abyss between us. It's quiet. After everything, after so much time, that's all it was. I wanted him to say he missed something, that there was a hole inside him, that he had strange dreams about a woman he didn't know. But there was nothing, just that dry and resigned response. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to find strength. You never tried to remember your past, to know who you were before coming here. He hesitated for a moment. I think I tried at the beginning, but then I accepted that maybe it's better this way. My heart crumbled. I spent half my life looking for him, wanting answers, and he simply accepted forgetting. The nurse interrupted with a careful tone. He has no memory of what happened before he was found. We tried therapy, we tried clues, but nothing brought back the memories. Some cases are like this. The mind blocks certain things to protect itself. I wanted to believe it was true. I wanted to think that deep down, the Michael I knew was still there, waiting to be awakened. But what if he wasn't? What if the man who loved me had disappeared forever, and all that remained was this stranger before me? I swallowed the pain once more. Michael, do you trust me? He looked at me for a long time before answering. I don't know. My chest tightened. It was an honest answer. He didn't say he didn't trust me, but he also didn't say yes, because I was just a stranger to him. I tried to smile, even feeling my soul shattered. Would you mind if I came to visit you from time to time? There was a silence before he answered. You can come if you want. It wasn't what I expected, but it was all he could give me at that moment. I left the hospital feeling as if I had lost Michael for the second time. The first was when he disappeared years ago. The second was today, when I realized that even after finding him, he might never again be the man I loved. The sun was shining outside, but to me, everything seemed gray. The streets were busy, people went on with their lives, and I wondered what would become of my life now. For the first time in many years, I didn't know what to do. The love I lived for didn't exist, and I faced a pain I still didn't know how to bear.
I want to pause for a moment. If you feel the love and are still listening to my story, please subscribe and hit the like button on the Grandparents Memories channel to show your support. Thank you so much.
I could barely sleep, and when I did, my dreams were a whirlwind of past memories mixed with Michael's empty look in the present. It was as if my heart and mind were trapped between two realities, that of the love that once existed and that of the emptiness that now occupied its place. I tried to act as if nothing had changed. My routine remained the same. I woke up early, had my coffee, took care of the house. The people around me didn't notice that something inside me had broken in an irreparable way. But inside I was crumbling. I had felt pain before, had experienced the loneliness of not knowing where Michael was. But now it was different. Now I knew. I knew he was there, a few miles from me, living a life that had no room for our past. The question that wouldn't leave my head was, what do I do now? I could simply accept what I saw and move on. I could forget, try to close this chapter for good. But was that what I wanted? To spend so many years waiting for an answer only to give up in the end? No, I couldn't give up so easily. There was something inside me that refused to accept that everything was lost. If he was alive, if fate brought him back to me after so long, then I needed to try, even if he didn't remember, even if he never returned to being the man I knew. I couldn't simply walk away. The following week, I returned to the hospital. This time, my heart didn't beat as desperately as before. I already knew what I would find. I no longer expected to see him suddenly recognizing me, nor did I expect a miracle. But I wanted to see him again. I needed to. When I arrived, the same nurse greeted me with a gentle look. He's in the garden today. He spends a lot of time there. I followed the corridor to the outdoor area where I found Michael sitting on a bench, observing the trees. The wind gently moved his hair, and for a moment he seemed peaceful, oblivious to the world around him. I took a deep breath before approaching. "Hello, Michael." He raised his eyes to me and frowned, as if trying to remember where he knew me from. "You came back." A small relief ran through my chest. He didn't remember who I was, but at least he recognized that I had been there before. "Yes, may I sit?" He nodded slowly, and I occupied the space beside him. We remained silent for a while. What should I say? I wanted to tell everything, wanted to talk about our past, wanted to say that I had spent my life waiting for him, but something inside me told me that wasn't the best approach. I needed to go slowly. "How has your life been here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, without showing the weight of what I felt. He shrugged. "I don't know. I guess I've gotten used to it. It's strange to think I had another life before this." My chest tightened. "And you never miss something?" He took time to answer. "Sometimes I have dreams, but they don't make sense. They're just flashes, faces I can't identify, sensations. But I don't know if they're real memories or just things my mind made up." My heart accelerated. Could it be that somehow he still kept parts of our past within him? Could these pieces come together again with time? "Do you feel like something was left behind?" He turned his face to me, analyzing me as if trying to find the answer within me. "Maybe, but what if I never remember?" That question caught me by surprise. What if he never remembered? Would I still be there, trying, waiting, believing that one day he would return to me? I didn't know. All I knew was that even if he never returned to being the Michael I loved, I couldn't simply abandon him. Because love doesn't disappear. It changes, transforms, but never completely vanishes. And I was willing to prove that. That afternoon, when I left, I made a silent promise to myself. I would return. I would return as many times as necessary. If fate brought me to him again, then I would do whatever was in my power to recover, even if it was just a fragment of what we once were. I wouldn't give up because even if he no longer knew who I was, I had never forgotten him. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. I returned to the hospital regularly. At first, I just observed Michael from afar, not quite knowing what to do or say. I was afraid of pressuring him, of scaring him, of forcing something that perhaps could never be recovered. But with time, our coexistence became part of my routine. He didn't ask much about me. It was as if he was used to having my presence there, but without worrying about understanding why. Sometimes we talked about simple things, the weather, the birds in the garden, the taste of the hospital food. Other times, we just remained in silence. I wondered what was going through his head. Was there, in some corner of his mind, a memory trying to resurface? Or was the man I knew simply gone? There were good days and bad days. On some, he seemed calm, even comfortable with my presence. On others, he was more distant, confused, as if something inside him was trying to fight against a past he didn't understand. It was in these moments that my heart tightened more. I wanted to tell everything, wanted to shout that he had been my great love, that I had spent my life waiting for him. But there was something inside me that prevented me, the fear that even knowing everything, he would still choose not to remember. One afternoon, when I was about to leave, Michael surprised me by calling me by name. It was the first time he had done that without me needing to remind him. "Eleanor," my heart raced. "Yes?" He hesitated, as if wanting to say something, but not knowing how, then looked away and shook his head. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. I knew it wasn't. From that day on, something began to change. He started to observe me with more attention, as if trying to find something familiar in me. Sometimes I caught him staring at me for long seconds, and when our eyes met, he quickly looked away, confused, until one afternoon he asked the question I most feared. Was I married? My heart stopped for an instant. What should I say? If I told the truth, would it help him remember, or would it only increase his confusion? I swallowed hard. No, you never got married. He frowned. But I was going to get married. That question carried a weight he couldn't imagine. Yes, I whispered, almost without the strength to say it aloud. He looked at me for a long time, and I felt that moment could change everything, as if something inside him was about to awaken. But then he just nodded and went back to looking at his hands. I see. That's all. My chest tightened. He didn't ask who the woman was he was supposed to marry. He didn't ask for more details. He just accepted that information as if it were a distant fact, something that didn't concern him. That night, I cried as I hadn't cried in years. I realized that perhaps, no matter how much I tried, no matter how much I was there every day, Michael would never return to who he was. And I needed to decide what to do with that. In the days that followed, my mind was consumed by a single question. How far was I willing to go? I could continue there, insisting, waiting, trying to make him remember. But what if that never happened? Was I willing to spend the rest of my life living for a love that might never be reciprocated? But at the same time, how could I simply walk away after everything we had been through, after everything I had felt? Could I abandon Michael for the second time? The dilemma consumed me until, on a Sunday morning, something happened that made me make a decision. I arrived at the hospital and found Michael in the garden as usual, but this time he wasn't alone. A woman was talking to him. She seemed younger than me, well-dressed, her eyes shining with excitement. "Do you like music?" she asked him. "I don't know," he replied, with that tone of someone who doesn't remember their own taste. "I'm a piano teacher. If you want, I can play for you someday." That's when Michael smiled, a small, discreet smile, but a smile. I felt something break inside me. During all those months, I tried to draw a smile like that from him. I tried to bring back the man he was, tried to find some trace of the love we shared. But there he was, smiling at another woman, as if life was just beginning for him. And maybe it was. Maybe Michael had a new chance, a blank page. And maybe I needed to accept that this new story didn't include the past we shared. When the woman walked away, he noticed my presence. "Hi, Elle." He called me by name again, but for the first time, it didn't warm my heart. Because I knew he wasn't calling me as someone who remembered me. He was calling me as someone who merely recognized a familiar presence. I sat beside him on the bench. For long minutes, neither of us said anything. Then I took a deep breath and looked at him. "Michael, are you happy here?" He blinked, surprised by the question. "I think so." That was all I needed to hear. I held his hand for a moment, feeling its warmth for the last time. Then that's what matters. He frowned, confused, but I just smiled, a farewell smile. I got up and walked toward the hospital exit without looking back. This time, I knew I wouldn't return. I had spent my life waiting for Michael, but at that moment, I realized that maybe it was time to stop waiting. Maybe it was finally my turn to live. The days that followed my last visit to the hospital were the strangest of my life. I didn't know how to wake up without the expectation of seeing him again. For months, that routine of going to the hospital, of talking to him, of trying to extract fragments of the past had become my reason for existing. But now, all I had was an immense void, a question without an answer, What do I do now? For the first time in many years, I felt there was nowhere left to run. I had spent decades trying to find an ending to my story with Michael, seeking to understand what happened, believing that somehow fate would unite us again. But the truth was different. The truth was that I had been alone all this time. I spent so much time living for what could have been that I forgot to live for what still could be. In the first days, the silence inside my house seemed deafening. I woke up early, made coffee, looked at the door as if expecting something to happen. But there were no more mysterious letters, no clues to follow, no hospital to go to. My family noticed something had changed, but no one asked anything. I think deep down, everyone knew that my story with Michael, even without words, had come to an end. But I didn't know how to start over. I spent nights looking at the ceiling, wondering, what do I do now? Who am I without this story? It was then that a memory returned to my mind, something I always wanted to do, but set aside because I believed my path was already set. I wanted to travel. When I was young, even before Michael, I dreamed of seeing the world, of stepping on shores I had never stepped on before. Then love came, and after love came the waiting, and the waiting transformed into my only reality. I never allowed myself to leave my town because deep down, I always feared that if I left, Michael would return, and I wouldn't be here to receive him. But now I knew he would never return to me. So what was holding me back? One afternoon, I took courage and went to the travel agency in town. Never in my life had I bought a ticket to anywhere. I was always used to living where I was born, surrounded by the same people, the same places, the same stories. But for the first time, I felt I could change that. The attendant smiled when she saw me enter. "Can I help you?" I swallowed hard, still not believing what I was about to do. "Yes, I want to travel." "Where to?" That was the question. Where did I want to go? I could choose any place in the world, but at that moment, only one destination came to mind. To the sea. I want to see the sea. The sea, something I only knew from photos and accounts, something so vast, so infinite, so different from the life I had led until now. She typed some things and looked at me with a gentle smile. "We have a perfect destination for you." And so, for the first time in my life, I bought a ticket. When I returned home, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. For so many years, my life had been summed up in that space. The same room, the same walls, the same furniture. Everything seemed small now. I got up, went to my wardrobe, and opened the drawer where for all these years I had kept my wedding dress. It was still there, yellowed by time, carefully folded, as if waiting for a moment to be used. But that moment never came. I touched the fabric with affection, feeling every detail. Then, without thinking twice, I took the dress, left the house, and walked to the edge of the James River that cut through the town. The wind swayed the leaves of the trees, and the golden late afternoon sun tinged everything with a soft light. I took a deep breath and released the dress into the current. The white fabric, already worn by time, began to be carried away by the water, spinning, sinking, little by little. It was symbolic, I knew, but at that moment, I felt I was finally letting Michael go, not just him, but the version of myself that spent her entire life waiting for someone to return. The dress followed the river downstream until it completely disappeared from my sight, and with it, a part of me also went. When I returned home, I looked at my open suitcase on the bed. This time, it wasn't a suitcase of memories. It wasn't a chest of memories. It was a suitcase for a future that for the first time I was ready to live. The next morning, I took the train toward Virginia Beach. When I finally arrived, I was paralyzed before the blue immensity that extended as far as the eyes could see, the sound of the waves breaking on the sand, the salty smell of the wind, the warmth of the sun on my skin. It was all new to me. I walked to the edge of the beach and let the water touch my feet. And it was there, looking at the horizon, that I finally felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Michael was the love of my life, but the love of my life couldn't just be him. The love of my life also needed to be myself, and I was finally ready to love myself enough to move forward, because life was still waiting for me. The smell of the sea still lingered on my skin when I returned to my town. Something inside me had changed. Although I still didn't know exactly how to name what it was, I felt lighter, as if I had left an immense weight behind.
I want to pause for a moment. If you feel the love and are still listening to my story, please subscribe and hit the like button on the Grandparents Memories channel to show your support. Thank you so much.
But at the same time, there was a void where the love that sustained me for so long once was. It was a strange mixture of freedom and mourning. In the first days after the trip, I walked the streets of the town and noticed how everything seemed smaller, not because the buildings had shrunk or the squares had diminished, but because I had changed. My eyes had seen something beyond the limits that surrounded me all my life, and now that world that was once everything to me no longer seemed enough. My routine returned to normal, but the truth is that I was no longer the same. The silence that once suffocated me now seemed to be an invitation to start over. One morning, while having coffee on the porch, I saw an envelope at the door. My heart raced for a brief moment. For years, I lived waiting for letters that never came, but this time, I knew it wasn't from him. Michael was no longer part of my life. I picked up the envelope with firm hands, without tremors, without fear. The sender's name was that of the hospital. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath before opening the letter. It was short. "He asked about you this morning." My eyes ran over the words again, trying to absorb the meaning of it. He asked about me? But why? I sat down slowly, feeling the ground slip from under my feet. I spent months by his side, waiting for some trace of memory, wishing for a look that would recognize me, silently begging for him to find me amid the fog that covered his mind. And now, just now, when I had finally left everything behind, he was asking about me? My first reaction was a knot in my chest, an impulse to run back to the hospital and see him one more time. But then something inside me resisted. I had spent so much time living for the memory of a love that might never return. Now that I was finally free, should I open that door again? Deep down, I knew that if I returned, I would risk being swallowed by all that again. But what if it was my last chance? I spent the rest of the day lost in thoughts. My feet wanted to move forward, but my heart was still attached to that name, that face, that love that never completely died. The next morning, before I could change my mind, I went to the hospital. As I entered, I felt the heavy air loaded with memories. Each step took me back to all the days I spent there, waiting for something that never happened. The nurse received me with a soft smile. "He's in the room. Do you want to see him?" I nodded, but my hands were cold. I walked through the familiar corridors to the door that led to Michael's room. I took a deep breath before entering. He was sitting on the bed, looking at nothing, but when he saw me, his eyes lit up, and he opened a small smile. "You came back." It wasn't a tone of surprise. It was as if he knew that sooner or later I would return. I sat in the chair beside him. I didn't know what to say. He looked at me for a long time, his eyes slightly narrowed, as if trying to understand something that was beyond his reach. I dreamed about you. My heart skipped a beat. You dreamed? He nodded slowly. You were in white, but you didn't seem happy. My chest tightened. He didn't know it, but he was describing exactly how I felt on our wedding day. I swallowed hard. What else do you remember? He looked away, confused. I don't know. I just feel that you were important, but I don't know why. Tears burned in my eyes. For a moment, a part of me wanted to grab that thread of memory and pull it with all my strength, forcing him to remember everything. But another part knew that wasn't fair. He was no longer the same, and neither was I. I took a deep breath, holding his hand for a brief moment. It's okay, Michael. You don't need to remember. He looked at me, and for a moment, I thought I saw a glimpse of emotion in his eyes. Are you happy? He asked. That question caught me by surprise. For the first time in years, I thought about the answer without hesitation. I smiled slightly. Yes. He nodded slowly, as if absorbing that. We remained silent for a few minutes, just feeling each other's presence. It wasn't a heavy silence, full of expectations and pain, like those we had already shared. It was a silence of acceptance. I knew at that moment that I didn't need to return there again, not because I didn't love him anymore, but because I finally understood that love sometimes doesn't need a perfect ending to be real. He was part of me, always would be, but my life was no longer tied to him. I got up slowly, squeezing his hand one last time. Take care, Michael. He smiled slightly. You too, Elle. And with that, I left the room, walking out of the hospital, out of that part of my life, with the certainty that I was finally free. The love I had for him was great, was strong, was real. But now it was time to love myself, and this time I wouldn't wait for anything from anyone else, only from myself. As each day passed, what had begun as a fleeting thought slowly crystallized into a concrete plan. Then, on what seemed like just another ordinary morning, I purchased my ticket. This journey wasn't merely to glimpse the ocean. This time, my ambitions stretched far beyond that modest goal. I yearned to explore destinations that had previously existed only in my imagination. I longed to wander through unfamiliar thoroughfares, inhale exotic aromas, and savor cuisines that had never crossed my palate. But most importantly, I was desperate to uncover who I might become now that I had shed the burden of a past that had never truly been mine to carry. When departure day arrived, I deliberately left my house at dawn, relishing the crisp morning breeze against my skin. I carried only what I couldn't do without, no unnecessary baggage, no spectral remnants of bygone days, just the unburdened feeling of someone who had finally embraced living in the present moment. As I stepped aboard the train, a profound sense of calm settled over me. The uncertainty of what lay ahead didn't trouble me as it once would have. For the first time, I welcomed the unknown. I understood intuitively that wherever this journey took me was precisely where I needed to be. This time would be different. I wouldn't postpone my happiness, waiting for external circumstances or other people to align. My joy would depend solely on myself. Dear beloved audience, from the bottom of my heart, I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to all of you for patiently listening to the story of my life. I hope it serves as a profound lesson about love, waiting, and the journey of rediscovering oneself. Sometimes we spend our entire lives waiting for something or someone, forgetting that life continues to move forward every single day. My story is not just about an unfinished love, but also about learning to let go. having the courage to start over, and understanding the importance of self-love. I hope that through this story, each of us will realize that it is never too late to begin a new chapter, to explore the world, and to find joy in the simplest things. If you enjoyed this story and would like to hear more meaningful stories, please subscribe to the Grandparents' Memories channel. Every subscription and every like is a great encouragement for us to continue bringing you heartfelt stories and valuable life lessons. I would also like to express my sincere thanks to the founder of Grandparents' Memories for creating this wonderful platform and for inviting me to share my story. This is truly a precious opportunity to preserve and pass on the memories and wisdom of our generation. I look forward to seeing you again in the next stories, where we will continue to explore the beautiful puzzle pieces of life together. Thank you, and may your day be filled with love.